Rewritten! Epilogue! It was 10:23. Stephen hasn't gotten out of bed. He couldn't find a reason to, so he hasn't yet. The house was empty and deathly quiet. He didn't know where anybody was. His dad had left early, saying that he had to go do something. He didn't remember exactly when, but Stephen eventually realized that there was nobody around at all anymore. He didn't know where they'd gone, but he didn't have enough willpower to find that out. He just felt tired and empty, worse than usual. Stephen had caused a big mess yesterday. He'd went into town. A lot of people had called the police, and even though they hadn't arrested him, Stephen had still left behind a disturbed ruckus. He always left behind disaster, wherever he went. He was grateful for Petey's help, but it hadn't come soon enough to stop him from scaring the public again just by existing on the same street as him. "Monster!" they'd all screamed. "Run! It's back! The monster's back!" They hated him. Everyone hated him. It was like a vengeful, dark red cloud outside of his house, seeping through the vents and the cracks in the windows and doors, finally able to reach him and poison him. He'd been able to mostly ignore it until now, but not any longer. Stephen was a freak, and he wasn't getting better. He thought that he was. He had thought for the past few days that he was feeling better. He was finally getting up out of bed by himself. He was able to smile at his family whenever they kept him company. Ever since telling them about what White Diamond did, they'd been able to help so much more, and they'd all gotten closer. Sure, they'd taken it badly at first, being very upset that he didn't tell them before, but after the days passed, the weight of it was shared. He was lighter. But now, Stephen felt like he was sinking into the very core of the earth. It took just one nightmare. A new one this time, a resurfaced memory. His last moments before corrupting. I'm not Pink Diamond. I'm worse. Stephen had woken up thinking that the dream was real, and had bolted out of the house, not wanting to hurt his family. And now he was knocked back to square one. Stephen was like a spat-out wad of gum, tasteless and disgusting, used up for all of its purpose and destined to stick there on the pavement for the rest of eternity, useless. He was a hopeless case. He'd always be a monster, inside and out, and he was fooling himself if he ever thought that he would change. 11:15. The slanted sunbeams in the window were in his face. He rolled over, his first movement since he dragged himself to the bathroom 2 hours ago. He felt like a beetle trapped in dark, inky goo. It stuck to him, getting everywhere, sucking him down, never letting him go. Even if he managed to climb out, it would still trail after him, never able to be washed off. He was drowning, and he deserved it. Nobody needed him anymore. All he was now was a worthless pile of scales and flesh, a heavy bag to drag around through life. Why was he here? He was ruining everyone's lives with his stupid problems. He shouldn't be doing this to them. They should be happy with their futures, not staying trapped here with him. Everyone hated him. Why did they keep him around? Nobody wanted him, and he'd wish that they would stop pretending that they did. If they just let him go already, then maybe they could be happy. His chest ached and his eyes stung in response. Stephen curled up tighter on his bed, a paw over his face. A paw. His paw. Talons, scales, leathery pads. Inhuman. All of it hurt so badly. He was hyper-aware of it every single second of every single day, and he was tired of it. But being tired of it didn't make it go away. Pain layered on top of more pain, never ending, not leaving him alone for a single moment of relief. He wished that somebody would put him out of his misery. This was going nowhere. His paws would never be hands, fangs would never be molars, scales would never be skin. He was stuck to it all, and he would never be able to get rid of it. Why even try? 12 o'clock. Stephen was glaring at a monster. His talons were gripping the sides of the mirror, the one on his closet door, the one that he hated almost as much as he hated the image held in it. He didn't recognize himself. It was his face, but it wasn't his face. He was mutated and ugly, a disgusting mixture of flaky scales and pale, sweaty flesh. Two things that were never meant to mix. The tusks jutting out from his cheekbones were hooked, warping and dragging his features. His mouth was barely able to close properly, fangs poking out, jabbing at his scabbed lips to slice open the sores over and over again. The dark pink scales that made up more than half of his face were wrinkly and spiky, patching here and there like bad burn wounds. His ears were like a weird pink goblin's, too big and pointy, twitching and raising and lowering involuntarily. The top of his head bore two horrible curved horns, standing tall and sharp like a demon's. He was a freak. He already was a freak. He has been his whole life. But now it was visible. Now his freakiness had spilled out to the rest of his body, infecting it too. Stephen was scowling at his reflection, his terrifying features sharp and jagged with the expression, like they were always meant to be in a constant state of crazed fury. Nothing about his horrible face had changed, nor the rest of his body, throughout all of these weeks of trying. He'd been feeling so much better recently. He really felt like he was picking up speed again, on the road to being human. He was so sure that he had been close. Maybe not to being perfectly normal again, but maybe to being just a little more like himself. But after what happened yesterday, he was sure that he had been chasing a mirage. It was hopeless. It didn't matter how wishful he felt. It didn't matter how many times people told him that it was going to be okay. It didn't matter how long he glared at his reflection. He would always be a monster, and nothing more. He was glowing again now. He'd been flashing on and off all morning, and he didn't bother to give his gem any attention. It kept on sending signals to eat or drink something, worried for him as his hunger and thirst grew, but he didn't care enough to listen to it. It didn't matter. He'd feel just as bad if he ate or not. The corruption scars would still be there, everyone would still hate him, and he would still be a monster. His family was probably talking to the townspeople about him, probably about how annoying he is and how they want to get rid of him. Maybe that was why they weren't here. They were all making a plan together to ban him from their whole lives this time, to tie him up and throw him into the ocean or something. They all wanted him to leave. He wasn't going to get better, so there was no point in them wasting their time on him. Stephen was a monster. This is why Connie is avoiding you. A scream erupted from his jaws, the noise furious and anguished and tortured, thrown at his disgusting monster face like he could scare it away. The mirror cracked. Spiderweb fractures split across the surface, breaking his reflection into scattered snippets of what it was before. He ran out of breath, and the scream brought it down into a whimper, his claws squeezing the sides of the mirror, eyes still hooked on the copies that were facing him. A sob racked his body, and Stephen let go, not registering the cutting pain in his paws, backing up. Everything was too loud. His talons reached up to his head and scraped over his scalp, digging into his hair, breath heaving in and out, his eyes bugged and wet, watching his reflection, watching the tears gather in numbers, watching himself break down again, watching him fail right there in front of him. Stephen collapsed onto the floor, knotted himself up into a tight ball, and cried as hard as he could. The screen door opened. His ears flicked at the noise. He was curled up, quivering and whimpering quietly into his horrible paws, shining with pink light. Somebody was coming up the stairs. He didn't have the strength to get up and hide. He just lied there, his pitiful self out in the open for them to see. He could hear them in his room. They stopped at the doorway, then walked over to where he was, standing over him. He squinted warily up at them and saw a big pink tongue incoming. Stephen yelped and sputtered as the tongue swiped over his face in one long stroke, scratchy and thick. It was Lion. The big pink animal was looming over him, not seeming to have any regard for his personal space as he advanced on Stephen, licking him all over. Lion, hey, stop, what are you... Stephen protested weakly, tasting blood in his throat. Lion was on top of him now, still licking him vigorously like Stephen was his kitten, practically suffocating him. Stephen managed to push away Lion's muzzle, gasping for breath, still unable to wriggle out from underneath the big pink animal's broad paws. The mushy, poisonous, boiling muck that had become his thoughts was being stirred up, confused, distracted. He didn't know what Lion's plan was, but the creature was being strangely affectionate. Maybe he wanted a treat or something. Lion curled up around Stephen, rumbling deeply and nuzzling into Stephen's side. He shuddered in a sniffled cough, just letting it happen, feeling a little overwhelmed from the big pink cat's attention being added to everything else that was happening in his thoughts. He would have normally been honored to be chosen as Lion's favorite for the day, but even all of this wasn't lifting his spirits past the surface level. Lion, I'm glad you want to help, but... Stephen sighed, his voice wearing out as the sentence faded to nothing. Lion watched him, blinking. And then he found himself suddenly burying himself in Lion's mane, seeking the comfort with a starved need, tears seeping out of his eyes as he clenched his fangs into each other, hugging the side of his fuzzy friend. He didn't go into the pocket dimension held there. He just tried to sink into the soft fur, trying to imagine that he could hide away from everything if he just stayed there long enough. He shook with silent sobs, everything storming around inside of his head, not knowing what to do, not knowing why he couldn't feel better. They hate me. I know they hate me, Stephen finally stammered, emerging from his mane briefly. I'm not useful anymore. I'm just some freaky lizard kid with anger issues, and I can't fix myself. I'm always gonna be a monster. It's all hopeless. They don't want me in the town. They don't want me around today. They don't want me in their lives at all. His thoughts circled back around to the same place that they had been revisiting hour after hour. Even Connie hates me, he practically wailed. I don't blame her. I know it's not her fault, but even if I know that it's not her fault, why does it hurt so bad? He stared desperately up at Lion, knowing that he didn't understand what he was saying, knowing that he probably had no idea what was up with him today, but still asking him all the same. Lion, why am I like this? Why can't I fix it? Lion blinked at him, mute as ever. He sniffed at his face, nose twitching, snorting with a tilt to his head. And then he got up, pushing Stephen down gently onto the floor with a paw, lying him down. He licked the side of his face one last time, turned, and left the room. Stephen watched sadly as Lion's pink tail disappeared down the stairs. He sighed. He figured that Lion wouldn't want to stay long. Nobody would if they got the choice. Stephen was about to go back to his depressing cycle of spiraling thoughts before he heard heavy paw steps again, coming back up the stairs. Lion returned, popping his maned head up into his room and trotting over to Stephen's spot on the floor again. He sniffed at Stephen, who hadn't bothered to budge from where he'd been pushed down before, nudging him with his muzzle. He had something in his mouth, clenched carefully between his teeth. Lion parted his jaws, letting whatever it was fall out and plop next to him on the floorboards. Stephen blinked at it in confusion, staring blankly at the objects that he'd dropped. It was his pill puddles. Lion grunted whenever Stephen didn't react, pushing them closer to him with his nose, urging him on. Strange. Stephen couldn't remember taking his medication this morning. And then he realized that the reason that he couldn't remember was because he didn't. Stephen had been too caught up in the horrible emotions that had dragged him under to do anything at all this morning. Of course he would have forgotten this too and made it worse. Nobody was around to remind him. He gingerly pushed himself to sit up, picking up the little orange bottles. They were unfortunately slimy now since they had been in Lion's mouth, but he was too distracted by the surprise of the big pink animal bringing them to him at all. He already knew that Lion showed signs of intelligence much higher than any normal lion, probably due to being revived by his mom, but it was almost fascinating to see that Lion had connected Stephen being unhappy to forgetting to take his medication. Thanks, Lion, Stephen said slowly, reaching up and scratching him behind the ears, gently with his talons. But even though he had his medication now, he still wasn't sure if he should take them. It seemed hopeless. How could they help? Giving his brain happy chemicals doesn't fix everything else. Lion saw him begin to set them down and growled sternly, pushing his shoulder. Okay, Stephen said. Fine. He guessed that he should take them. Better now than never, and he was pretty sure that it wasn't too late already. But Stephen didn't want to open them whenever they were still covered in slobber. He had to go wash them off, and he had a staircase and a stretch of open floor to get past before getting to the faucet. And no family members were here to help him this time. He looked over at Lion, and the big pink animal seemed to know what he wanted. He leaned down next to him, letting Stephen carefully climb up onto his back, holding onto his mane for support. "Thanks," Stephen gasped again. This was the most help that Lion has ever been before. Lion huffed and set off down the stairs. They reached the kitchen sink, and Stephen slid off gingerly. The scaly hybrid boy kept one paw on Lion as he ran the bottles under the flow of water, washing off the slimy gunk. After they were clean, Stephen opened them up. It was difficult without real hands, but he managed to figure it out by biting the top. He shook the right amount into his leathery palm, staring at them blankly. "They won't fix it. Shut up. Go away." Just to spite whatever was whispering to him, Stephen shoved them into his mouth, swallowing them down with a cup of water. He stood there, tingling as if he was waiting for something, even though he knew that they didn't work instantly. He licked his lips, finally registering the thirst. He drank the rest of the water in the cup, and then filled it up again and drank some more. Stephen stared around the empty house. What was he supposed to do now? He still didn't know where his family was. He felt bad. Not just in his head, it was in every inch of his body, every cell. It wasn't just sadness. It was more complex than that, and much, much worse. It was a senseless emptiness, a weight in his chest, one that wouldn't leave him alone. He just felt nothing. The absence of happiness, not even caring to replace the hole it left with something else, blocking him from feeling anything except the lonely cavern of nothing. What was the point of doing anything? He might as well just claw his way back upstairs and lie down in his bed some more. As Stephen began to struggle over to the stairs again, Lion stopped him, nudging aside, pushing him back to the kitchen. What do you want?" Stephen asked him, irritated. Lion poked his nose into Stephen's belly, then looked up pointedly to the cabinets where the food was kept. His stomach growled loudly in agreement, reminding him of his hunger. He didn't really care about food right now, but he guessed that he could eat. He was already down here anyway, and Lion didn't look like he would let him go back up to his bed until his needs were met. So Stephen found himself, a few minutes later, eating some cereal at the table. It was a little hard to hold the spoon with his dew-claw-like thumb, but he'd been able to fit it in between the talon and the side of his other fingers. Lion watched approvingly as he slowly chewed the bites that he was taking, tired of this, but not really having any choice. He knew that Lion was just trying to help, and he would usually be more interested in the fact that the big pink animal was acting much more caring than he normally did. But Stephen still didn't seem to be able to escape the inky, dark bits that were stuck to him. Why did it matter if he ate? How would this help? He didn't want to eat. He wanted to do nothing. Where was his family? Did they leave because they hated him? They ditched him. It made sense. They finally ditched him and were now moving on with their happy futures. At least that was one thing to be glad about. At least they were free from him. But if they were able to get free from him, how would Stephen get free from him? He couldn't. He was Stephen. He'd never be anybody else. He was stuck in this messed up, scarred, half-alien body forever. Stephen had set the spoon down by now, chin resting on his palm, staring into nothing. Lion stood up, nudging him again with a snort, almost demandingly. All right, okay, Stephen sighed crossly, picking up the spoon again and continuing to eat. He tried not to be too mad at him. At least Lion cared, even if his priorities were weird. Stephen didn't know why eating was so important whenever he was eternally stuck as a horrifying reptile man-beast. Lion's ears perked up, and the big pink animal stood again, a determined glare in his face. He began to pad towards the screen door, before stopping and looking back at him. Lion glanced between Stephen and the door a few more times, and then went back to him, stopping briefly to lick the top of his head before deciding on the door. Lion gave him and his bowl of cereal a look that said, "That better be all gone by the time I get back," and then squeezed through the small frame, leaping over the railing of the porch. Stephen stared where he'd disappeared, feeling tiny traces of warmth leaving with the fuzzy animal. Maybe it was like last time with the pills? But Stephen couldn't think of anything else that he might be getting. He looked down at the cereal. There was no milk. He hadn't wanted to spend 30 minutes unscrewing the top with his awkward claws, and most of the little wheat-colored rings were still there. Even if they all ended up inside of him, that still wouldn't make him a better person. "Stephen, please!" His gem's worn-down thoughts shuffled up beside his. "You need food." Stephen didn't bother to reply. He didn't take another bite either. Come on, his Gem complained. I'm getting really hungry and it sucks and I know you feel it too. The concern for him grew stronger. Why are you all sad and floppy today? Can I punch whoever made you feel bad? Still, nothing. Stephen, his Gem echoed sternly. I know you can hear me. Say something, please. I'm getting really worried. Stephen didn't respond to words. He just pushed the bowl away, put the spoon down, and laid his head down on the table, not having the energy to argue. His Gem seemed to give up on conversation then, retreating further into the back of his mind, not knowing how to help. He was alone again. Stephen was pathetic. It was like he couldn't function without his family. For goodness sake, it was almost 2 o'clock, and all he'd done was 2 things today. 3 if you counted using the bathroom, but 2 of them only got done because of Lion. That was a whole 2/3 of his productivity today, if you could possibly consider taking medication and eating a few bites of cereal productive. He was lost without them, useless and forgotten, the wad of spat-out gum. He closed his eyes. He stayed at the table in the empty house for a long time. Stephen only opened his eyes whenever he heard somebody coming up the porch stairs, running so fast that his footsteps were pounding and slipping. Rushed, terrified words were getting louder. Oh, please, 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 be all right, Stephen. He blinked, lifting his head, his heart jumping. It sounded like his dad, and it turned out to be him too. The pudgy older man threw the door open, bursting inside the house, with Lion not far behind. His eyes instantly zipped to Stephen, and relief melted through his expression. Stephen, he cried out. Dad, he croaked, staring in disbelief. Not waiting a second longer, his dad sprinted towards him, almost knocking him out of his chair in his frantic rush, enveloping him in his big, soft arms. Oh my goodness, Stephen, that darn cat gave me a heart attack! His dad yelled, trying to calm down. Lion ran up to me and started pushing me to the house, and then I saw where he was trying to get me to go. I thought something happened to you! Stephen felt his face creasing up as tears flooded his vision. He tried to answer, but all that really came out was a weird gasping sob of pain. His dad was here. He didn't know why, but he was, and it felt like someone had stabbed him in the throat with a wrenching longing. He hadn't even processed how lonely he had been until he was in his father's arms again. And even though he thought that it was selfish, Stephen found himself clinging to his dad desperately, a lifeline, not ever wanting to let go if it meant returning to the quiet emptiness of the house. He felt Lion patting over onto his other side, giving him another lick over the back of his neck, an added dose of comfort. His dad backed up a little, his hand still holding his spiny shoulders, looking him up and down. He seemed to be trying his best not to look too shaken, chuckling, So, are you okay, bud? Or did Lion just want to see me do some cardio? Stephen opened and closed his mouth, choking on a word, seeing his dad's relieved expression begin to flicker to a concerned one. He stared around the house, suspicions growing, and then asked, Wait, where's Amethyst? Stephen bit down on his tongue, still fighting tears as they continued to march out of his eyes, looking down at his feet, shrugging. I don't know. I don't know where anybody is. Well, now I know where you are, but... His dad blinked several times, like this wasn't adding up. A sudden guilty fear swept through him, and he stammered, Wait, have you been alone all day? Stephen flinched and nodded slowly. Yeah. A sudden outrage flared in his expression as he yelled, What? Amethyst was supposed to watch you! He paused, then reconsidered. At least, I think she was. He shook his head, confused. Wait, no, maybe she was supposed to go pick up more food? But that's what I was doing. Lion glared pointedly at his dad, his fluff-tipped tail flicking in irritation. Horror flashed through his dad's face, and he gasped, Oh, no, I'm so sorry, Stephen. I had no idea. The Gems were going to town trying to clear up what happened yesterday, and there must have been a mistake in our schedule. He hugged his big arms around him tightly again. Are you okay? I'm so sorry. I didn't know that you were here alone. It must have been horrible. I would have come home straight away if I knew. Stephen was surprised at his dad's words. So they hadn't left him out of hate? It was just an accident? Part of him sparked up at that, but the rest of him was still mostly cold. His dad seemed to realize that too. His gaze flicked up to the stairs, and he asked, "How did you get down here?" Stephen gestured to Lion, who was striding over to his side again. "Lion found me at, I don't know, noon." "Noon?" his dad echoed. "But before that, were you just in bed?" Stephen shrugged with a nod. "All day?" He looked more and more guilty with every second. He didn't want to make him feel bad. He said, It's okay, really. I understand if you guys don't want to be around me." No, don't say that," his dad said sternly. "This was a mistake. We love you. We'd never leave you alone if we knew." He blinked rapidly, hugging him close once more, saying, "I'm so sorry, Stephen. Please don't think we wanted this." Stephen whimpered into his shoulder, stammering, Dad, I broke the mirror." "That's okay, we can just buy another," his dad began, but Stephen interrupted. "No, I mean, this morning's been awful, and I need to... His dad rubbed his back, understanding. "Oh, I get it, okay, you want to talk to someone." He stood up, still keeping a hand on his son's shoulder, his gaze flicking over to the medicine bottles and the cereal bowl. "Gosh, okay, here, I'll get you some real food first. You must be starving." Stephen shrugged again and mumbled timidly, "Not really. You don't have to if it's too much trouble. I mean, if you don't have time to talk, that's okay." His dad shook his head, insisting, "Of course it's not trouble, Shoeball. You're never not worth the trouble. We can talk once you eat something." He reached the fridge, opening it and asking him, "So what do you want?" Stephen shrugged, a movement that should, at this point, make his shoulders hurt. "Come on, you have to be craving something," his dad encouraged, the creased worry in his eyes not matching the cheery tone. "We've got sandwiches, one of those salad things, noodles." "Sure," Stephen said. "Sure to what? Noodles?" his dad asked. "Yeah, sure," Stephen nodded, picking at a scale on his knee. With that, his dad took the chosen food out of the fridge and began to warm it up in the microwave. As it cooked there, both his dad and Lion helped Stephen limp over to the living room couch, settling him as gently as they could. Once the noodles were ready, his dad took a steaming bowl of them over to Stephen and sat down, handing him a fork. His dad sat close to him, giving Stephen another quick side hug before leaving a hand on his quilled back, watching him with concern in his wrinkled gaze. Lion curled up next to his feet, a mound of pink fluff, glaring at his dad before closing his eyes and laying his chin on his paws, as if saying, "My work here is done. Your turn, Greg." Stephen spent the first few minutes of this just staring blankly at the noodles, lost. His stomach was rumbling eagerly for him to get a move on, but Stephen felt like the rest of him was stuck in the same place as before. Why exactly did his dad think that he deserved to eat? Why did it matter? It wouldn't change anything. He lifted his taloned paw, the fork pinched precariously in between the dew claw and the tough pad of his palm. It wasn't meant to hold items. It was meant to walk on, to tear things apart, to swipe at people before they got close. He remembered how he had used his paws yesterday. He'd walked on all fours, like some type of animal, and it had felt right. It was humiliating to think about. Eventually, Stephen had gotten up on two legs once he realized what he was doing, but for hours after that, he hadn't been able to shake the feeling that he had it right the first time. Stephen was a beast, some escaped creature from the zoo, and he was fooling himself if he ever thought that he could change. "Oh, Stewball, come here, it's okay," his dad was saying, wrapping him up in another warm embrace. Stephen shriveled towards his dad, only realizing now that he was crying again, burrowing into his side like he could hide from everything as long as his father's arms held him close. "Do you need to talk?" his dad asked. "You can talk to me." Stephen sniffed and nodded, though he stayed hiding in his dad's arms for a long time, trying to calm down enough to speak. "Dad," Stephen began, still clinging to him. Am I a monster?" He already knew the answer. The real one, anyway. Yes, 1,000 times, yes. But he knew that his dad wouldn't say that to him. Some part of him wanted to hear him say no, to lie to his face, just so he could get a brief reassurance. "No, Stephen, of course you're not," his dad told him, as expected. "Is this about what the townspeople were saying about you yesterday?" Stephen winced, squeezing his eyes shut like he could block out their screams as they echoed through his ears. "Monster! Get away from us, you freak! Someone call animal control! Monster!" His lack of a response seemed to be enough. His dad drew back slightly, wanting to meet his gaze. "Stephen, look at me. You're not a monster. You're my son," his dad told him sternly. "They don't know what they're talking about." Stephen looked up at him despairingly and said, If I'm not a monster, then why do I have these and these and these?" He was pointing to his talons, his horns, his fangs. "If I'm not a monster, why do they hate me? If I'm not a monster, why can't I get better?" He pressed his palms into his eyes and yelled, "I'm not a human like you! You pretend like I am, but I'm not! I'm a half-alien freak! I've been like this my whole life! It's just that now it's not only having a magic rock in me, it's also looking like a failed science experiment! Everyone finally sees how messed up I am, and I can't hide from it anymore either!" Stephen, hush, it's okay." His dad was trying to calm him down, seeing how fast that he was falling down the spiral of dark thoughts. Then he quickly took one of his talon paws, pressing it into Stephen's chest, saying, "Here, feel this. What is this?" Stephen paused, still shivering with gasps. Under his leathery palm was the fast drum of his heart, frantic but constant. My heartbeat?" Stephen said slowly. His dad nodded, repeating, "Your heartbeat, your human heartbeat." Stephen blinked, looking down at himself, then up at him again. His dad continued, "It doesn't matter that you have a gem or that you have scars. It's still beating, right?" Stephen nodded slowly. "Yeah." "You're human on the inside," his dad said. "You've always been human, and you always will be, all right? As far as I'm concerned, you're human. These scars don't make up who you are." He wiped one of his tears away and continued, "But either way, it's not like it matters. Think about the gems. They're not human. They don't have heartbeats. Do you still love them?" Stephen nodded quickly. Of course I do." "It's the same for you. It's not such a bad thing to not be a human. You've got the best of both worlds." His dad grinned, moving his talon paw off of Stephen's chest. "I wouldn't care if you were a human, a gem, a hybrid, a dog. You're still Stephen. You're still my son, and I still love you." Stephen had no idea how badly he needed to hear that before now. He leaned towards his dad again, head tucked down, his tears still flowing pretty heavily. His dad hugged him warmly, letting him calm down for as long as it took. Stephen was human. Maybe not all the way, but it was enough. And even if it wasn't, his dad would still be there to love him, just like always. It was late during a cold, dark night. Pearl was standing attentively beside Stephen's bed, unmoving in the darkness, not wanting to make a sound that had the chance of waking up the tired boy. Stephen was sleeping, finally, tucked under thick covers with his head propped up on the pillow in a way that didn't put pressure on his horns or tusks. Pearl remembered that Stephen used to sleep soundly, going down only in 30 minutes after settling into bed and not getting up until late in the morning, refreshed from an innocent, forgettable dream and ready for the next day. But Stephen never slept that good anymore. It took long hours of restless, uncomfortable shifting before he was lulled into sleep, and even then, Stephen never fully relaxed. His eyes were always wrinkled up, forehead creased with tension. His bat-like ears would flick involuntarily, muscles in his face and back and hands twitching every so often. When he had particularly bad nightmares, he'd begin to glow in his sleep, whimpering and crying until they woke him up and hushed him down again. Sleep was difficult to come by, every night a new challenge. Tonight, Pearl and Greg were Stephen's guardians. But Pearl's concerns had begun to not only be directed to Stephen lately. She wasn't sure if anyone else noticed, but all of this constant care seemed to be having an effect on Stephen's father, too. Greg almost never left his son's side. He was always the first to act whenever Stephen began to spiral out of control, and it seemed that no matter how dangerous Stephen's gem powers could be to a fragile human, Greg never once ran away whenever Stephen glowed. Pearl knew why, because the same had happened to her. Stephen's corruption meltdown scared all of them. Stephen had gotten so close. They'd all come so close to losing him forever. The fact that it took them so long to notice that something was wrong with him snapped them out of the happily ever after haze that had shrouded their view of the world. All of them knew how close they had come to losing Stephen. When Stephen began to drown in Rose's fountain, they had all, at first, thought that it was because he was too weak to swim on his own, but Pearl was beginning to suspect that it had been no accident. And those thoughts worried them sick. They were never, ever going to let anything like that happen again. And if that meant around-the-clock care, they were going to make it happen. Unfortunately, humans weren't really built for that kind of strain, and it was beginning to show on Greg. Pearl could see it in Greg in the late hours of the night. The old human was sitting down next to his son, his hand on Stephen's spiny shoulder. His eyes were bruised with sleeplessness, his head bobbing up and down as he fought against drowsiness. Pearl was pretty sure that Greg wasn't getting enough sleep. She knew that it was for a good cause, but staying up for days on end should be saved for her or one of the other gems, not a human who actually needed sleep. It was good that Greg was actually committing to his son now, but if he ended up falling ill, it certainly wouldn't improve Stephen's state. Pearl finally decided to confront him about this. "You should sleep," Pearl whispered, keeping her voice no louder than the whistling of the winter's wind outside the windows. Greg's head jumped up again, looking her over in the low light, but his gaze landed back on his son. "What if Stephen—" "I can watch him," Pearl said. "I can stay up. I don't need sleep, but you do." Greg seemed tempted for a moment, but he shook his head, refusing, rubbing his eyes with an enormous yawn. "Oh, no, I can't. I have to be there for him. I can't abandon him again." Pearl felt surprise flash over her features at the exaggeration. "Abandon?" she whispered. "You wouldn't have abandoned him." Greg looked like he was going to protest, and then turned away, as if trying to ignore her. She knew the thoughts that were circling around his head. The same ones were bothering her. Pearl felt the shadow-filled silence stretch on, but she broke it again, whispering over to him. "Greg, you're not a bad father. You're far from that. You've been helping Stephen so much recently. You've been giving everything to him. You're doing so much better now than you were before." She tilted her head, trying to meet his gaze, and said, "Letting yourself sleep won't undo that." Greg seemed to be thinking about that, a weary eye staring back down at Stephen's huddled form. Eventually, Greg let out a breath, nodding. Okay, fine, but wake me up if something happens." Pearl nodded, watching Greg lie down next to his son, settling down without disturbing him. Silence paused through the winter night again, and a few minutes later, she heard quiet snores from Greg's side of the bed. Pearl leaned back, relieved that she had been able to convince him to rest too. She watched the moonlight playing on the rippling waves of the ocean outside the window, dousing herself in thought again as time ticked by. She hadn't really realized it until she said it out loud to him, but Greg really had changed a lot recently. He wasn't hiding anymore, he wasn't running anymore. Something had changed in him after watching his son turn into a monster. Something that snapped him out of the optimistic, oblivious, it's probably fine phase his mind went into whenever gem stuff started to happen to his son. It was a good change. Pearl just wanted to make sure that he wouldn't wear himself down to the bone in the process of finally caring for his son. Stephen's breathing was getting faster. Pearl snapped to attention right before she saw his skin flare blazing neon pink, filling the room with the light. Pearl moved as she'd learned to move, sitting down next to him in bed and brushing her thin hands over his curls of hair, the sides of his face, his shoulders and back, brushing gently and calmly, hushing him softly. Stephen's muffled whines deepened back into snores, his breathing leveling out, the pink glow melting back into darkness. Pearl relaxed too, seeing the nightmare going away easier than usual. All of this worry for Stephen, all of it could have been avoided. But it wasn't, and now it was their duty to make up for it. Pearl leaned back against the headboard of his bed, hands still brushing through a curl of his hair, more to soothe herself than anything. She knew what Greg was going through. The worry, the guilt, the determined drive to do better this time. She hoped that one day all of them would be able to make it up to Stephen. Make up for all the times they failed to protect him.